This is Hester, and this is Maria, and together we are the Consort Counsellors!
Today we bring you a few tips on how to mix with your partners. When you play in a large recorder ensemble, very often you will share the same line with other players, and then you want this line to sound as if you are one player, sharing all the colors, the expression, the articulation, and everything else, creating a magic blend.
The tips we give you today are very useful when you practice separately with all your line partners together, or when you have a tutti rehearsal and you spend some quality time on a separate line. Okay, we need to fix this, but how?
To check if we are close enough in tuning, there's a very simple exercise we can do to start with, and that is we take a pitch or even a little fragment from the piece, and each player of the same line repeats it one after the other. So we listen to each player individually, and then the question is, who was the one with the sharpest pitch? Who was the one with the flattest pitch? Can you hear it?
Can you hear the difference? Drum roll. When you are able to distinguish the difference in pitches, then try the exercise again. Decide upon the player that was in the middle of the range of the pitches, and then try to come close to this middle.
Of course, now we are listening to the pitches isolated and just one by one. If you still find it difficult to hear if one pitch is higher than the other, there is another thing we can try, which is the following. Player 1 will play the same A once more and will keep it very, very stable, which of course is not easy, especially because then the second player is going to join, play the same note, and on purpose explore what happens when you make the pitch higher by blowing a little bit more and using faster air, or lower by doing the opposite. By doing this exercise, we are experiencing what happens when the frequency of our tone is too high compared to the reference and too low with respect to the reference, and in both cases we get the same phenomenon, beatings.
Then do this exercise again, playing the pitch, blowing a bit more, blowing a bit less, and then deliberately choose consciously that your pitch is matching the pitch of the reference player, and add all the players of the same line to see if they all can come close and they can all experience the difference in frequencies and the stability of the note when it's matching very well.
The balance check is about checking who is the loudest and who is the softest within your section, and then seeing if we can also meet in the middle when it comes to volume.
If you feel your instrument is so high that you almost cannot blow anymore, you could consider pulling it a little bit out. But we recommend to be really careful with this because it affects internal tuning as well. And it's actually better that you are flexible yourself in fixing this balance problem with other means than pulling your instrument out.
In the end, it may actually be an advantage that some instruments are slightly higher than others, because then you can have part of the ensemble sustaining a strong sound and the others with the higher instruments mixing and playing a bit more softly, which leads to a very nice mixture of loud and soft.
Even when you play with two instruments that have the same level of volume, let's say, you can choose for several passages to have a softer mix, and then you can make use of the technique of alternative fingerings. To practice to have a nice mix of normal fingerings and alternative fingerings to end in a smooth way, we suggest you start a couple of bars before that, and then player 1 stays with the normal fingering.
That will be me.
Yeah. And player 2, me, will try to find the nicest, softest mix into the regular fingering with an alternative fingering. Check the pitch, play it all over again, and try to find it immediately.
Check has to do with two aspects. One is our physical movement, and the other one is how accentuated and active our playing is. As you can see, it is quite easy to meet in the middle if Hester acts a bit less active and I wake up a little.
With your line partners, it's really good to decide per phrase a certain goal where you want to go to, and then you come back again, and maybe another goal you want to go to and come back again, so that it's really clear how the wave of the phrase is designed within your line. This of course also depends on the general agreements within the ensemble, how to play a theme and what a director said to you. But when you practice alone with your line partners, it's really good to choose something and to stick with it. And even when you have to change later on, it's very good to already have experienced this kind of way of playing.
Playing in an ensemble that has a high consort and a low consort, which are doubling the same part in octaves, the most important secret is always that the high consort mixes into the fuller sound of the low consort. So in a way, the low consort chooses the sound and the high instruments adjust themselves to that. In that way, we get a subtle and beautiful mixture.
And then the articulation check. Practice the articulation of each phrase separately and decide upon which notes should be played detached, which should be almost connected, which should be played pointy, which should be played with a sharp attack or a very soft attack, and so on, and so on, and so on. Sometimes the conductor will decide this for you, but if not, you have to do it.
Sometimes when you are playing in unison on the same type of instrument, it can have an enormous impact which instrument each of the players is taking. You heard before Hester playing on a plastic recorder and on a wooden recorder, and it sounded very different. We will show you now 4 different combinations of instruments. Which one do you find the nicest? And maybe you'll be inspired to try all the instruments you have at your disposal for your own Unison playing.
Then, for the color check, pick a few notes in your phrase which need some special attention. For example, by giving it a certain shape in the sound, or by giving it a certain color with the use of vibrato. But of course, it's good to check that first all players can play the phrase in a plain way, with the right articulation, with the right direction, with the right tuning and with the right balance. And then, as cherry on the cake, you can do the color check.
When you decide to use vibrato as a section, you have to be quite careful, because if you don't exactly share the shape of it, you may still end up hearing this same sort of beatings as if we're actually out of tune. So you have to really make sure it fits together and it's very well shared.
At the start of this episode, we mentioned the ultimate goal to sound as one when you play with many players on one line. But this may sound a little bit strange, because why would you then play with more players and not just one? Well, the beauty lies in the fact that it's so cool that many players all together can share the same feeling, the same interpretation when you play the same line. And also that you create a very interesting mix of colors and timbres that is actually much more interesting to listen to than just one player.
To play very well together in unison, you need to have very good ears, and therefore ear training for musicians is very important. It's one of the many reasons why this is useful. So today we want to recommend you a list of the best 5 ear training apps, which has been compiled by the website Musician Tuts. We leave you the link in the video description, and we hope you will have a lot of fun sharpening your ears.
You may have noticed that last week we didn't post an episode, and it's true that we are going through very, very busy times with a lot of concerts and a lot of projects, so that we are not always able to post a complete episode for you every Monday. But we will for sure not let you down and post very regularly. We hope you enjoy our episodes, and if you like our stuff,
don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that whenever a new video is available, you get a notification and you can run to watch it.